Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our meeting today of the Strong Communities Select Committee. And I think it would be helpful if we all began by introducing ourselves. I'm Councillor Jane Pratt, the Chairman, and I represent Llanelli Hill.
Paula Harris Scrutiny. Sorry, Rebecca Blount, Waste Education and Awareness Officer.
Sue Parkinson. I'm also Waste and Recycling Education and Awareness Officer.
Roger Hoggins, Head of Operations. It is working.
Mark Cleaver, Environmental Officer in the Waste and Street Services Department.
I'm Alan Davis, Committee Member and the Member for Green Lane Ward in Caldicot.
Val Smith, Member for Lambert Ward, Member of the Committee.
Linda Guppy, Member of this Committee, Member of Roggett Ward, South County.
Councillor Lisa Dimmock, the Elms ND.
Councillor Laura Jones, and Member for Wisham and a Member of this Committee.
Richard Roden, Member of this Committee and Councillor for Dixon Withers Baston.
I think you might have a problem with your mic there, Councillor Eason.
And I'm Tony Eason, County Councillor Dewster Ward, Caldicot. That's better.
Thank you very much, everybody. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Sorry, I've missed apologies. Who do we have apologies for absence from, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies this morning from County Councillor Anne Webb.
So if we can confirm on agenda item 4 the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 28th of September. So I think it's be too long to take this a page at a time. Has anybody got any issues they'd like to raise concerning the minutes of the previous meeting?
I'm happy to move them as an accurate report, Chairman, and then speak on we have an actions list that relates, I think, to the minutes, which I'd like to comment on, please.
Thank you. So if we take, first of all, the accuracy of the minutes, is everybody happy that they're accurate? All in favour? Thank you, that's moved. And if we move to the action list, and Councillor Smith, if you'd like to.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The first item that was referred to in the minutes, there were numbers of action points arising from our previous meeting. I've had the list sent to me by Mark Howcroft of the statutory duties. It's a lovely lot of information there, which you can peer at for hours. So I'm very pleased to have received that. All the other items that were raised, I've got a little mark alongside. They were answered via email. Now, if any member of the public who was actually watching the meeting wanted to actually follow up what progress there was, are they going to be able to access those responses? I don't think that's a very good way of responding to questions that were asked at a public meeting. The public need to know what the responses were, and members need to make sure their IT works so that they can see the responses as well. So that was my thing, public meetings with public. I think that we need, rising from the points and the minutes of that meeting, that we as a committee should be looking at a report on progress monitoring absence levels. It's not to be critical, it's to be supportive to officers. So I would like to see that on our agenda for the future, an absence of that. And a question that went through my mind, not related to this at all, as a member, how do I contribute to preparation of the budget? We're told frequently at meetings that, contribute, all contributions welcome. Well, how do I, as an independent member, do that, please? Thank you.
There's some. Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Some very valid points made there, and I agree with you. We'll find out from People Services, why these were just answered by email and why then and how they're going to be made available for everybody. Also, I think it would be prudent to invite the officer back to discuss the progress on absence to this committee at a future date. And as far as contributing to the budget,
yeah, I've spoken to Mark Howcroft this morning in answer to your question. He said that the budget process report is going to Cabinet on the 22nd of this month, but it's already available to all members and it's been circulated. We look for member interaction in different ways through scrutiny committees, one-to-ones, executive members. He's also said that he will act as a person, as a contact. If you want to go and speak to him directly on any issue, he's more than happy to speak to you.
I hope all members are aware they can do that then. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. And I think if the officer can actually communicate that to all members so that nobody is in doubt how they can contribute.
It might be the perfect answer.
Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. On the action list, we've got a string of actions, but a point that was raised by Councillor Webb at the last meeting was Councillor Webb requested that we look at burials and funeral costs. That hasn't come up on the action list, and I'm wondering why, on the basis that there are a lot of discussions nationally about what point in time you charge people for burials, particularly youngsters. That's not on the action list. I just wonder if there's a response to that from maybe Roger Hoggins, Head of Operations. I'm aware that some town and community councils are looking at the cost, particularly Caldecott, will be looking at reducing the cost to people, or removing the cost to youngsters under 18 from burial costs. Monmouthshire County Council are looking at another policy. I just wonder where we are with that, because it's not on the action list.
Thank you very much for raising that point, Councillor Eason, and I know certainly at my community council this week, I know the Welsh Government, for example, are looking at the issue of burials of children. Roger, would you like to make any comments?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The development of a policy for burials and any charging and the like would lie with our property and estates team. So what I will do is pass on your request to Deb, from members. There's an action from that. I'll pass that on to the head of service and ask for them to prepare a paper for you.
So would that be reflected within the budget?
Okay, if we're looking within the budget specifically, then you will receive or you will have seen by now on the draft budget for the coming to Cabinet on the 22nd. I don't recall there being any issues in there in relation to charging around burials. That isn't to say that they're not, because they're not within the operations remit, but I don't recall it. However, that would be the avenue if you wish to pursue whether or not they are or are not in there. And it takes us back to Councillor Smith's comment about how do you feed into that process. Now, this may well be the relevant scrutiny committee to pick that up, because I suspect at some point as a scrutiny committee you will be looking at elements of the budget which are within your, or the draft budget, elements which are within your remit, and the implications of that prior to it going back to Cabinet at a later date. So I would suggest, I will raise it with the head of service that the committee has raised that matter. In any event, you will be able to raise it through the budget process if you're looking at it in that context.
To me, there must be a potential cost if there's to be a removal of charges for people under 18. They're saying this morning a burial for somebody under 17, 18, it costs about £3,000. How many do we have per year? What is the viability for the council, for the authority? And I think we need, if we're going to move this forward, it needs to be part of the budget process, but we also need a decision to move forward on it.
Yeah, Thank you very much for that, Councillor Easton. I mean, it's our understanding that this is coming to this committee as an item, but as you rightly say, you know, we need to know what the implications are to the budget. So, Roger, will you'll raise that?
Because it's something that's been of interest and concern to me for some time, and I've raised. I was looking at it in a broader way, not purely the costings, but actually at service delivery and all the aspects that are attached to that function. It's much broader than saying, well, so far as I was concerned, Tony, than looking at the costs and such like. Let's look at that service for the public.
Totally agree with you, Councillor Smith, and it needs to be brought as a proper comprehensive report to the committee. So are there any other comments anybody would like to raise concerning the action list from the last meeting? Everybody happy? So we'll go on to item 5 now, which is the reuse scheme at the civic amenity site. And we've got Sue and Becky with us today, and I understand you're going to present this to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Roger's going to present.
Roger's going to. Oh, sorry. Roger. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members got the report in front of you. The principle of reuse is top of the tree in terms of recycling. That's the best thing to do. And this offers us an opportunity to create a reuse centre within our Llanfoes site. The scheme falls outside of a new contract which is presently in procurement for a transfer station and recycling centres. That's going on. So this lies outside of that, but will be reflected in those contracts because whoever operates the reuse centre will be taking a lot of their stock from that recycling facility. So that's been recognised. So they will work together, but this arrangement is outside of that contract. It's being developed with homemakers. We've got a long-established working relationship with that organisation. It's a not-for-profit organisation. Some years ago, we arranged for them to take on a bulk collection service, and this is to extend that relationship. It will be for a year's trial in the first instance, and after that, depending upon performance and our findings from that, we'll decide how we're going to procure this arrangement in the longer term. The arrangement, as I say, will be for a year's trial. Monmouthshire County Council will recover its costs through the arrangement. In the report, there's some indicative figures. You know, it all depends on how good the custom is, but it's some indicative figures. And MCC will recover its costs, and then homemakers take the balance thereafter. It is, however, open book, so we need to understand in that 12 months quite what this looks like and what benefits are coming through. And as I say, it was an open book arrangement. Feedback which we've had from consultation over the years is, why can't we reuse things? And it is a facility which is used by other authorities, I believe. So as an introduction, hopefully that's enough to explain where we are with this with members, and perhaps then Beck and Sue will pick up any questions which members may have.
Thank you very much, Roger. And, you know, this is an exciting development, and I know that we've got some good questions for you. So, Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I love the idea of the scheme. I think it's great. But I'm just wondering if there is any... Are you saying to me that there's not going to be any profit made for MCC?
I think the idea it's certainly during the trial period is that we'll be looking to fund a post which homemakers will provide of £8,000. Anything over and above that will go to homemakers, and the £8,000 will come back to us. we don't necessarily see it as profit making. It's equally important to see it as removing some waste from the waste stream and bring it back into reuse. So it's like a dual purpose.
I mean, they're obviously doing us a service, aren't they? That's saving us in that way. But after the year trial, it says here about sharing the money 50-50 with MCC and some of the schemes. If we did make any money, say we did make any sort of profit, where would that money go? Would it go back into sort of establishing more schemes like that, or that particular scheme, or would it just go into the general coffers?
In the first instance, it would come into general coffers, but if the scheme is seen to be a success and we viewed it as such through the first 12 months, it might be appropriate for us to say, let's reinvest some of this back into a scheme elsewhere. And we do that on occasions. You will have seen other schemes where we've taken funding come in. Okay, it's receipts in this instance, it may be charges in others, where we try and reinvest back into the service to develop the service. So if at the end of the first 12 months we think, yes, this has gone well and we need to put it elsewhere, I think practically you've got problems about where you might put it. It isn't going to fit in Troy, it isn't going to fit in Esk. I don't think it is anyway. No. But you might get away with it with 5 lanes, is what's going through my mind. But let's give it that 12 months and see what other schemes might come forward. So, but yes, the money could be, in the first instance, it'll go back to the authority. We would then come to yourselves and to Cabinet and say, please release some of this money to go back and reinvest it into this, and that's how we would do it. Oops, I just switched it on and off.
Thank you very much for that question, Councillor Jones. I'll take Councillor Smith and then Councillor Roden.
How long is the grant from the Welsh Assembly, the sustainable grant one, and how much do we get? That's the reference in 5.1, the resource implications, the Environment Sustainable Development one.
It's the Environment Sustainable Development Grant. We get quite a large pot at the moment. It largely funds a lot of the work that we do in waste and recycling, and a small amount of that is also used for special projects like sort of dog fouling, litter, and the reuse shop, as well as other departments make use of the funding as well. The Welsh Government are changing the way that fund is going to work, so that the core waste work that we do will come as part of the single revenue support grant. Sorry. So there will be a smaller pot available, but it will still be available for us to use for project-related waste and recycling projects.
If I may, Madam Chairman, the other point I would make is when you look at your budget papers, you will see under pressures a reduction on that grant. I think it's now called the Single Environment Grant. It's under a different name, but the Welsh Government have indicated they are going to reduce that budget year on year, and the impact for Monmouthshire is a £60,000 budget pressure. So that is one and the same budget. We use predominantly for our waste and to support our recycling services, but as Sue's pointed out, it gets used elsewhere, and this is one of those areas. But it is coming under pressure because of Welsh Government policy in relation to that.
Can I ask, is this because of the policy of sort of putting grants, if you like, into the total monies we receive, or it's an actual reduction, that 60,000, it's an actual minus, rather than saying, okay, we're not going to nominate that money for that job. It's going to be in your main allowance, come on, what's the word I want? The money we get from Welsh Assembly anyway. Yeah.
The two answers to that. It is a real cut to the budget. Right. However, they are also transferring, I believe, 85% of that existing grant into the revenue support grant. 15% remains outside, which gets used on schemes such as this and other, I think the schemes in countryside and
yeah, there's schemes in countryside and also in flood prevention as well.
Thank you very much.
Are you happy with that response, Councillor Smith?
Yeah. I welcome the scheme. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly, when I look at what's thrown into the skips, I think it's deplorable. you can see what an impact sort of a bicycle has to somebody living in Africa. It revolutionizes their lives, and yet we just chuck things like this into bins, and I think it's dreadful. So I welcome the scheme and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. If I can take the next question from Councillor Roden and then Councillor Guppy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The officers are to be congratulated on bringing this development to us. In order to help make it a success, what types of publicity will you be utilising? Because I'd like to see this be made a real success and to extend it to other possible centres in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We aim to use a full range of things to publicise what is essentially a good news story, and it's been very much, there's been a huge appetite for this. We have lots of schools visiting the One Planet Centre, which is just across the way from the area of land that we've identified. So for every visiting school now, part of their outside tour will be visiting the reuse shop in the future, we hope. And I think a story like this, when we put it out there through traditional means of press releases and social media, and at the site there, what used to be called the tip, we call it the Household Waste Recycling Centre, we'll advertise it there as well. And I think it'll generate a lot of positivity, and it'll draw people to it. And it's, I think it's been a frustration to the staff there and to members of the public. Like I said, we've seen items being thrown in. It's very much overdue. So we'll use a wide scope of resources, and of course we'll bring in the schools for naming the shop as well. So very much feel it's a collaborative initiative. Is that all right?
Yes, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roden. Councillor Guppy.
Yes, I just wanted to know how the scheme will affect the homemakers' criteria for families to request for furniture. Is it being run separate? Because I think sometimes homemakers can be a little bit, it's not open enough. It's open up for families establishing new households, and it doesn't go beyond if families have a need for furniture within the house. They won't help those families, and we haven't got a scheme in Monmouthshire. I know that there's a scheme, Raven's House, that families can go to, but that's further afield. So how does this scheme marry up with their criteria? Because obviously there's going to be more coming forward, and I just wondered if that there can be a looser condition on people who want furniture out there, or there's a need via social services or housing or community medical staff that can sort of be brought into this scheme because of the it's going to generate more household items that people don't want and can be reused.
We see there being a distinct difference from the reuse shop that homemakers we hope will run for us to their existing operation. I think we'd be stretching it to say that we would be looking specifically at social services references for those families. But what I would say, it might benefit those in a wider way, and that the items that will be coming into the shop will be much cheaper. There'll be a higher throughput, a higher volume of stuff coming through. For example, dining room chairs would really be sold for a couple of quid, £2. We're thinking along those lines because of the sheer volume coming through. So our work in developing the service level agreement with homemakers would be to say, very firmly that we would keep those prices very low because of it wouldn't be the showroom type situation that you've got at the existing homemaker store, which is about a mile away. And we anticipate that it would be a wider clientele coming in. You'd have everybody from, upcyclers and creative types, salvage yard, lovely salvage yard vintage pieces, to boot sailors who are looking at, collectible bits of bric-a-brac that might have fallen out of fashion. Perhaps you and I wouldn't like it, but they have an eye for it. So that, but also to families who are in need, because it's it'll be a very cheap and cheerful, and we would be very firm that we would want bargains to be had at that shop, so that while there would be a provision for the more expensive items to be sold, perhaps rarer items coming through could be sold at other avenues, those items would be very few and far between, we would say, and we would want bargains to be had there, and a really wide range of people coming to us. Is that all right? Does that answer?
Yeah, but maybe sort of just monitoring sort of any surplus that's there that, so I don't know if homemakers, they'll collect their stuff. Are they going to emerge their stuff within the shop, or this is what I don't understand.
They would be very separate, so we wouldn't...
completely separate.
It would be very separate. The items coming from off the top of the ramps, where people, take stuff out of their boots and they kind of hesitate for a moment before it goes into the skip. It's those items we'll be having, and we're not anticipating there'll be large items of furniture like sofas, not too many of those. There'll be more wooden items, bric-a-brac, there'll be suitcases and golf clubs and miscellaneous items. We're anticipating that's certainly true of the other sites that we visited. And the customer satisfaction is what we'd be aiming to keep high. I think already it's like 90% satisfaction rate of customers visiting what they deem to be the tip. We would want to keep that as high for the shop. We'd want to enhance their experience there, but not detract from, as well as traffic coming to the site. We'd want to keep that quite separate, and we'd want it as complementary rather than taking anything from the existing site or from homemakers, which is it's a different type of feel to that premises.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that question, and for clarifying the distinction between this and what will be happening at homemakers. Councillor Dimmock.
Thank you, Chair. I support this idea, but I was just wondering if there been any further thought to extend into other sites, such as south of the county. And also, will we be looking at offering a collection and delivery service for maybe our more elderly residents or our non-drivers?
Yes, Caerwent would be we had quite a lot of discussion as to whether we should go for 5 lanes at Caerwent or Llanfoist, and because some more improvements would be needed to Caerwent to enable a shop to go there, we decided to go for Llanfoist because it would be easier to develop as a trial. But certainly 5 lanes is the second one we'll be looking at, and we do have in the back of our minds a hope that we will be able to develop another shop at 5 lanes after this trial. Sorry, what was the second part of the question? Oh, deliveries.
Yes.
I think that's probably unlikely. We haven't thought about it, to be honest with you. Maybe it's something we should consider. Because homemakers are able to do deliveries, and I'm aware that obviously this shop is in one end of the county, and your part of the county is at the opposite end. So maybe we do need to put some thought into that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support the initiative. I was brought up at the beginning of the war. My parents never threw anything away. Life was different. Cultures changed. People have a throwaway society. The only question I ask is, how would you intercept such items? Because that, to me, is a problem. When I go to the skips now and again, my eyes water when I see what people are throwing away. But you've got to catch it before they throw it away, before it gets damaged. That would be, I would say, a cost implication on how you would intercept. And also, you say that you're talking about homemakers and you're talking about the county council. You say in your report the management and operation would need to be a function of the council, which really isn't a function of homemakers. Where would the difference be there? And the final question is, I do see a lot of electrical stuff being thrown away. lampstones, for example, like you can't see what's wrong with a lawnmower, but by and large they can be repaired, I believe. How would you deal with items where you need pat testing and you need a security? You can't just flog it off in terms of that. And there are plenty of empty shops in Caldecott. Perhaps the town team could take on the responsibility for 12 months and see what they could do.
Okay, thank you. Trying to jot down all the points that you made. Well, the electrical items, simple. We wouldn't be selling those in the foreseeable future from the reuse shop. Some projects do. We wouldn't be looking to do it. It would just further complicate things. At this stage, we just wanted to keep it very simple and take non-electrical items to start with. In terms of intercepting the items, what we anticipate is that up on the ramps, so the area where the residents drive in and they're offloading things out of their boot, the Viridor staff, they already assist in helping residents with items out of their boot. But anything, there would be plenty of liaison and some training of the Viridor staff on items, what to look for, the type of things that, were deemed to be saleable and reusable. So they would speak to the resident, ask them if they were happy. For example, garden furniture, they would say, would you mind if we could sell this down make use of it? If the resident was happy for that, they would put it to one side in a small area, looking at possibly a small cabin shed, and there are plenty that Viridor said we could make use of. They'd put it all to one side, and then a couple of times a week, then the manager of the shop would go up and take the items. They could either be weighed over the weighbridge going across, or counted items, documented. There are lots of ways this can be done, and that's still to be ironed out through the service level agreement, but that's the idea. So we wouldn't want volunteer staff at the shop wandering around on the ramps. It would be done in a very set, and there would be a protocol set for it with a clear understanding of what items were safe and acceptable to take. On the clarification of the operations and the management, where the demarcations are, I think we have to sit down with homemakers and be very clear about what's expected of them, and for them to raise their issues and concerns with us about what they think is workable and where the boundaries are. And also for Viridor, who are very supportive of this project. They've got a very successful site down in Priors Wood in Taunton, so they know what good looks like, and we would expect full input from them. So it'd be a three-way conversation and setting the service level agreement about operating responsibilities. And it's not. It hasn't been pinned down. It hasn't been done in stone yet. This is part of that process. So we welcome your input. If you have some views on that, to come back to us.
I support the initiative. I think there's a lot of logistical problems that you just mentioned which need to be ironed out.
Yeah.
I know the Usk site, they sometimes use it on the way here. It wouldn't work there. I know the one in Monmouth, it wouldn't work there. I don't know so much about the one in Landfoist. But 5 lanes, I think you'd have lots of impractical practical problems there, where on a busy day, the cars are stacked up to the main road.
Yeah.
It would then be, it would detract from the system if it was just a case of get rid of the cars.
Yeah.
So I think there are logistical problems that need to be ironed out. Fully support it. I think we should try it. And try and iron out these problems as they come along. I say, in terms of 5 lanes, you need a bit more of a active space rather than trying on the ramp, quite honestly, because once it's on the ramp, it's just dump it, and that's when we use water something.
Yeah. We've got some work to do for sure. I just feel that in the last few years we've perhaps fallen behind. While Monmouthshire has been at the forefront of recycling, we've perhaps fallen behind on projects like this, and other authorities have come in and done them and made them very successful, which we've benefited from and now learned from. But it's time now, I think, that we had a go ourselves.
Well, we'd be foolish not to push it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Councillor Smith.
Sorry, Chair, again. The public will hugely welcome this. The amount of comment I've received over the years about Go, you see what they're throwing in the tip pile? What a waste. Why don't you do something about it? So I'm very happy to support the scheme. I can look at a table that came from the Torfine tip. It's travelled to Portsmouth, it's travelled to Burton-on-Trent, it's now somewhere over in Gloucester, all for £1.50. Very good buy that was those years ago. So welcome this. It has raised a question. Can I ask a question afterwards, Chairman, when you've concluded this? Because Tony's made mention of something that I'd like to speak about, please. Okay.
So you want to speak at the end of the...
It's all right, I can raise it now.
Yes,
actually,
please do.
Because Roger's here. Are we have we a contract at the moment, or are we looking at a contract to run our various sites with Verida? We are looking at it because Tony just made the comment about USC. No, it wouldn't really work in USC, it's chaos. And my experience yesterday, over the years, carrying stuff up there, it's not safe at times because the steps are not good, the assistance isn't always there. But anyway, car parking now is chaos. I had occasion to go to USC yesterday to use the surgery. There was no car parking available. It's getting very, very critical, that situation. But looking at the contract to run sites, that is, presumably we evaluate the cost of running the sites, how much it costs to run Coent, to run Foist, whatever, USC, wherever we have a site, as to whether we as a council are making best use of taxpayers' money. You know, are they viable propositions, or is it just historical situations? So you're really, really evaluating those situations. Right, that's answered that question very nicely for me, thank you.
I think Roger would like to respond to that first aspect.
I don't want to sound too simplistic, but the contractor will bid for whatever we tell him. If we say we want a civic amenity site in Usk in the car park, then they will bid to manage that. It will be for the authority to decide what they consider to be viable or not viable. In terms of it's probably difficult to evaluate that in terms of value for money. It is not a... There'll be a certain level of tonnage coming in there if that's how you wish to measure it. There's a certain amount which go to recycle it. But it is ultimately a facility for the community. And this scheme enhances that facility by making reuse, which is top of the tree. But as I say, at a separate time, in a separate report, we may need to look at what recycling centres we have, civic amenity sites we have, how we run them, and who manages them. There is a contract in development at the moment for procurement for managing our transfer stations and our recycling centres. Now that is underway now. But if you were to then amend it in some way, then contracts usually allow you to do that. You may pay a premium for doing it. It all depends how the contract's been structured. But ultimately, the contractor will do they'll charge you for it, but they do what service you want.
And can I ask, Chairman, will those proposals come to this committee to be scrutinised before decisions made?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Roger, have you got any information on that?
I'm trying to remember what stage that is at. I believe you've had a report on the services going out to tender. The results aren't with us yet. It hasn't. I don't believe it's actually gone out yet. But you have had a report that, in principle, it has in any event come to the end of its time. The existing contracts come to the end of its time. But I will have to check back on that to see what position that contract is presently in, and I'll have to advise members accordingly.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point that you've raised, and I think that's something we can certainly add on to our work programme.
Can we meet weekly?
Yes. Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of points. This may be pretty obvious, but I'm going to ask anyway. I mean, the principle is absolutely fine. We we all go to these areas and we all see all of this lovely stuff being thrown away, which people who perhaps are, you know, less well off than others could make use of. And I don't think it's about profit, really. It's about making sure that those things are utilised again. However, there could be financial implications. I know you've done your research with other councils that are doing similar things, but perhaps this is the best question for Roger. Is there any effect in terms of our recycling? Viridor do a lot of recycling now, so presumably any items that go to this new facility will be counted as recycled in terms of our recycling figures. And what I'm wondering is, and perhaps you can answer this from the experience of other councils, is there any potential within these sort of schemes to reduce the amount that we put to landfill? Because obviously that would be a significant saving for the council every tonne we put to use rather than put into landfill, or do you say that really it's not going to alter those figures considerably at all?
I'm not sure I can answer it fully, but there's a bit that I need to mention, that a lot of the items coming out we anticipate will be wooden items, and currently they've just changed the way that we define wood in terms of recycling, because a lot of the wood waste goes for biomass. A lot of it now we can't count towards our recycling rate, so potentially, you know, it's not going to be as good. The more we can pull out for reuse, the higher up the waste hierarchy that goes, so that'll be a benefit, and it'll be very pleased for that wood to come out as well, you know, so it has a higher value. That would be a good thing. And a lot of these, going back to the profitability of them, we put in some what we think quite conservative opening hours and conservative potential income. A lot of these sites that open 7 days, I'm not suggesting we do that, but a lot of them that do, or even 5 days, are hugely profitable. And, you know, the income generation is vast. You know, and so we're just starting off very small, and we're pulling out elements of the waste that we can put into higher end products. Is that all right? Does that answer some of?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
What I would say is that obviously this is in its infancy. I note from the report that there are other councils that are regenerating electrical goods, for example, and you will need, obviously, as you go on, to look at the operation and what you need to put into place, because if there is money to be made, then obviously it's got to be financial benefit there. So what I would like to request as a committee member is that rather than wait 12 months until you evaluate, you know, this first initial trial, that we have some sort of interim report, say after 6 months, and not only, you know, how the operation is going, but what your plans are for further developing this system. And, you know, I get appalled when I go to a Coent at some of the things that are thrown away. I've never seen so many bicycles in all my life that's there. So, I mean, this can be a win-win for the council and a win-win for the community. So I think it's something that needs to be developed, and there needs to be an action plan to take it forward. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Could I just perhaps add to that, Madam Chairman? Our performance in terms of recycling, it's my colleagues, more learned colleagues, will correct me if I got this wrong, but it's largely around tonnage. So, in reality, these items, in the context of the overall tonnage which we dispose of, aren't going to make huge changes in your recycling performance. However, in my view, it's the right thing to do. And when Beck talks about the hierarchy, reuse is top of the list rather than recycle or revamp or whatever. All the other ones below that, I can't remember what they are. But this is the place to be. But in terms of our recycling performance, it helps, but it's not the be-all and end-all. The other reports which you see about your curbside collection services, the other stuff which is going into the CA sites as well, which is being recycled, because you've got wood going in there, you've got glass going in there, you've got metals going in there. All of those contribute to your performance. This helps as well, but it is at the primary level, and perhaps a clumsy term, but it feels like the right thing to do in any event. Other authorities are doing it, and stuff gets back in. There might be, after we've looked at it, given it 12 months, there might be an income stream back in there for reinvestment elsewhere as well.
And thank you very much. If I could just ask a couple of questions of my own. I really support this. I had a very sobering experience a few years ago. I was taken on a tour of a landfill site, and it was absolutely horrendous. And I think anything that we can do to stop things going into landfill are going to be, part of our well-being strategy for our future generations. I'd just like to ask, obviously you've looked at different operations elsewhere. How do you, and I'm really particularly keen that, this benefits people that are on low incomes and that are facing hardship. How are you going to prevent sort of commercial operators from perhaps exploiting the scheme? And secondly, are you going to photograph items and put them online, or will people, we did touch on advertising earlier, or will people have to just come down and see the items for themselves?
I think initially they would have to come to the site and view the items themselves. And I think what draws people in, talking to other sites, Priorswood in Taunton, and the one at Neathport Talbot, their pound shop, that's council run. Priorswood is privately run. The one at Neathport Talbot is council owned and run. Newport Waysavers is in Newport is the third sector charities. There's the range of 3 there in very close proximity to us. They're all very successful. The common denominator is an enthusiastic and competent manager at the helm. So that's what we would be looking for ours. We hadn't anticipated putting things online, although there could be the potential for that. I know homemakers do that with their shop. I guess that would be something to consider. Talking to the other project managers and councils, there hasn't been a huge problem with traders visiting their sites. They're generally looking for a particular type of collectible or item that's usually different from what the normal householder might be looking for. So they're not necessarily the same items, and interestingly, they don't dissuade or discourage them. It's kind of all inclusive, and they haven't found them in the sites that we've visited and talked to. They haven't found them a problem. They can almost, the well-run sites can almost pinpoint the times that certain types of customers will appear, and they've got it off to a fine art, which is what we'd be hoping to, replicate as well. That's our aspiration, to have it quite finely tuned. Is that all right?
Thank you very much. Well, unless there's any other questions, I would like to thank you very much for this report. I mean, the comments are in the main positive. I think members have raised some very important issues. I think there's a lot of things that need ironing out, and there's been some very valid questions today. And I also would like to thank Councillor Davis for his suggestion of bringing this back to the committee, because I'm sure this is a project that is going to grow and develop in the future, and we'd like to watch it very closely and see it develop. So thank you very much. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the tree maintenance approach, which is agenda item number 6. And I'd like to invite Mark to present this item. Thank you, Mark.
Before we move on, could we approve the recommendations?
Oh, yes, sorry.
I think it's important.
Sorry, but very good point.
It's just 2.
Yeah, so we'll move to the recommendations, and if we can...
Just to receive the report and we support development.
Just find them on my...
Sorry about that.
On my pen. Thank you. Yes, so can we all look at the recommendations that members receive a report from officers on the progress to date, and that members support the further development of the business model highlighted in Appendix 1? All in favour? That's to the report. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to agenda item 6, tree maintenance approach. Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to present a new draft tree policy for Monmouthshire County Council. The tree policy has been written in the context of the two acts, the Environment Act Wales and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act Wales. Almost all departments in the County Council manage trees in some way or another. We're changing the way we understand the value of trees, particularly in the urban setting, and how we recognise the contribution they play across a whole range of areas of our life. We felt it was incumbent to revisit the way we approach trees to ensure that all departments have a sort of a clear and consistent approach to the way they manage trees. In addition to that, the introduction of my council services means that we're increasing number of reports or inquiries regarding trees for a number of reasons, and it's not clear at present as to what our duties are to residents and what our liabilities are in terms of managing risk as an organisation. The purpose of the report, the policy, therefore, is to create some clarity around that, and also with the introduction of the quantified tree risk assessment process, to have a robust approach to managing or assessing risk and to identifying tree management requirements. Ultimately, the process will also give us a tool to respond to residents when they make inquiries and to go out and review trees and ensure that we do provide that consistent response and service to our residents, and ensure that we manage one of our greatest assets.
Thank you very much, Mark. So this report, we're asked to note and comment on the proposals for the tree policy, and I know that members have questions to ask. So if we could start with Councillor Roden.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. In general, I support the document that you brought forward. However, there's one area of concern, which is the works not undertaken by Monmouthshire County Council. We're saying that non-essential requests of pruning or felling for these reasons will not be considered. I feel that trees have an impact on people's mental well-being, and this can be adversely affected, I can see that you've come across this before, by light removal due to tree growth. And I think that possibly some flexibility should be introduced into this area if people are willing to pay for pollarding, if necessary, to give themselves better access to light. And I think a common sense approach in this area would be beneficial. Thank you, Chair.
Would you like to comment on that, Mark?
Yeah, the right to light is one of the most challenging areas, I think, that we have in terms of dealing with trees. There are a number of concerns around that, particularly, for example, with pollarding. The issue around residents paying for tree works on say a pollarded tree. Now, we do pollard trees. It is a process that we do, and we will continue to do under this policy, particularly around street trees. However, to sort of to start pollarding trees, which perhaps we wouldn't consider pollarding because somebody's prepared to pay for it, could mean that we are accepting future pollarding where a resident may no longer be there in the future. So it's very difficult to write into a policy, I suppose, a common sense approach. I do understand where you're coming from, but it is a huge challenge because of that potential ongoing liability that something like pollarding would create. There is perhaps some possibility around crown reduction, which wouldn't necessarily create the same ongoing liabilities as pollarding would, but again, it's, I think, a case-by-case basis would need to be sort of undertaken. How we write that into a policy is quite challenging, and we chose the wording for this particular item based on looking at a number of different local authority policies to give us at least a starting point, I suppose. In honesty, staff are quite I think sensible in that, but I have to admit it's a very challenging area.
Sorry, could you explain what you mean by pollarding being an ongoing liability? I'm not a tree expert, as you can tell. Thank you.
Okay, so trees by their very nature grow, we understand that. Their canopies will continue to grow, depending on their particular species, will grow to different sizes and different sort of canopy spread, to a point where they sort of stop getting any bigger, and actually in some quite often over time they'll retrench. So they sort of what we call self-optimize, and shouldn't require pruning at all, unless there is a safety issue that may be caused by a range of factors. Pollarding is something that you need to do on a cyclical basis, depending on the tree species, the location. That could be anything on a 10, 15, 20-year cycle. It really depends on the tree species and its location. Obviously, if you start to pollard a tree, one of the issues about pollarding a tree is that it does promote rapid regrowth, in addition to which, because of the nature of the stumps that are left where the tree has been pollarded, also does create weak points within a tree, so it can increase structural reduction in structural integrity, which is why you have to go back and recut it every so many years, depending on the particular species, its location and its regrowth. So you can't do a one-off pollard to resolve a concern by a resident. It is possible to do crown reduction, which is a very different technique, which can reduce the sort of the physical thickness of a tree. It's quite a technical arboricultural skill, and that can resolve tree canopy size to some extent. But pollarding is very much does create an ongoing management and cost liability.
Madam Chair, can I just make one final point? Please, thank you. So if a resident was happy to pay for crown reduction instead of pollarding, would that be possible to put into some form of words? I do think that there's some requirement for flexibility in this area, if possible. Okay, thanks very much.
I think that's something I'll look at how we can create some wording for and perhaps put that forward.
Madam Chairman, if I may, the issue about somebody being willing to pay does tend to push you down the direction of those who can afford to pay will get what they want, as opposed to the authority adopting a policy which says how they will manage it. But I do take on board the point which members make about there will be instances where we need to be more pragmatic in our view. Our risk always is that we then undermine the policy. So it will, I'm sure Mark and I, we will try to work on some wording around this, but the point is well made. I understand where the member is coming from, but in terms of them being willing to pay, we probably don't need that within the policy, but I do accept the pragmatism element which we may need to review.
Thank you. Are you happy with that response, Councillor Roden?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to echo what Councillor Roden has just said. I think it is a good idea and something we need to look into, but I understand what you're saying as well. I like the fact that one of the main aims is to preserve our trees as much as possible for future generations. I find that very encouraging. I think they play a big part in our environment in many different ways, and are good for us in many different ways. I just wanted to say, before I ask my question, is that the experience I've had since I became a councillor in Wisham of approaching you and you fulfilling my constituents' needs has been very, very good. The service has been excellent and really quick in my experience, so thank you for that. And you've always seemed to have come up with solutions where they want to just chop down trees. You're coming up with solutions where you either prune them back or do crown reduction or whatever it is. I'm not technical in sort of tree stuff, but so I appreciate what you're doing there, and it seems like you are fulfilling what you are saying here. But your workload has obviously increased due to you being more accessible to people contacting you directly. I just want to know how you're going to meet that demand, and how you are meeting that demand, or what you'd like to see in place to help you meet that demand.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for compliments about the service that we're delivering. In terms of the increased workload, to some extent, a lot of our workload is around people contacting us with an expectation which is perhaps unrealistic about what they can and can't expect from us as a local authority. And hopefully the point of the policy is to have a public-facing document which can provide some clear guidance to our residents as to what sort of things they can ask us to do. And that in itself hopefully should reduce the amount of unnecessary sort of inquiries regarding trees, and that provide a kind of a bit of a break on some of the issues that we face. I have to be honest, meeting the current demand for tree, for the things that we do identify where tree work is required, is a challenge. There's no point beating around the bush on that. And I'm relatively new to the council, and I've been obviously working with colleagues both within Waste and Street Services, but in other departments, and it's difficult. I think all we have to do is to keep trying to improve the policies, and you'll see in the report, the paper that comes with the report that comes with the paper, is that we've also want to look at process to improve our process, internal processes, not just in terms of how we manage those reports and go and visit those, but in terms of just the processes, how we manage them, and how we deliver the work, so that's improved. But it's going to be a challenge.
Councillor Rees and then Councillor Guppy.
Thank you again, Chair. My question comes down to the perennial problem of roadside verges and how hedges are maintained. You see some landowners doing a good job, others not doing a very good job. Where the job isn't being done very well, the Monmouthshire Company Council take the responsibility of flailing a level of that road, or side of the road, to make sure that it is safe to travel by. But by doing that, which is right, eventually the hedge is going to start to grow and fall back onto the road. I noticed Miss Leaworth is in the background, who generally deals with that. How often have you had to serve notice on landowners to make sure that their land, or the hedges on their land, is properly maintained? Because that seems to be a problem which comes up in road safety issues, speeding matters, particularly on B roads and R roads, where R-size roads, which really do cause a constriction problem.
In terms of numbers, I'd have to provide a written response back, Madam Chairman. I don't have that figure, but it may be useful to provide a short note of what we do and don't do, because we will advise that they have to take back canopies at a certain level and matters like that. So I'll do a written note, if that's okay, back to members with the numbers. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. Councillor Guppy.
Thank you. It's deemed that the council hasn't got any responsibility to carry out any works upon the tree that's causing issues. Will the council offer the services for that area to be cut privately by the resident, or have you got a list of, well, it's very difficult actually, but recommendation that it can be done? Because quite often there's a frustration with residents when they're deeming it's the council's responsibility, but it's theirs. And if you overcome that, quite often they want the problem fixed and they are willing to pay for it. How are we dealing that? Because it's not very apparent in the report.
Okay, within the tree policy itself, I think that we've actually stated that we won't accept private payment for works on the basis that, as I said earlier, the two acts, the Wellbeing of Future Generations, the Environment Act, work by Natural Resources Wales, and our general understanding of the value of trees is that if we don't deem the trees to require work, then we shouldn't be working on them. There are challenges we've discussed about light and whatnot. I think one of the biggest tools we have for helping residents understand value or what should and shouldn't be done is actually education. I'll give a sort of anonymised example, if you like, of a lady who I went to see about a tree encroaching upon a garden and light issues. And she was sort of telling me how lovely it was to be living in the setting, and you could see all around a particular location, gave her a good view of houses all around, and she's low down. And the treescape, which made it particularly wonderful. And I pointed out that actually all of those trees in an urban setting have to be at the end of somebody's garden. And if everybody was given the opportunity to prune the trees, or we pruned or pollarded or removed trees because of their own particular individual needs, at a community level it has quite a significant impact. And actually, if I said the same to all of those people, she wouldn't get those benefits. So we have to find somehow a balance. And I think the balance has to be what's the right thing to do at a community level and help the individual understand that, and how actually that decision on the tree at the end of their garden actually is important for them because it works for them when it's at the end of somebody else's garden. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And generally speaking, when I've written to people or been to see them and explained this to them, they've been understanding. They haven't necessarily got the answer they wanted, but we've had clarity in the rationale behind the decision. And whilst they understand it's not the decision they want, for the most part, they recognise that it's the right decision. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's when there is a need, and it's a private need, in view of offering that service. When there is a private need, take into account, I can understand that education, and some people just don't like trees or just think they're a mess because of the leaves in the autumn. But in view of when there is a need, how are we going to deal with that, or signpost them really?
So the obvious example, from what I understand you're saying, is where trees are overhanging somebody's garden fence. They have a right. They have their own common law rights to prune those branches back. Obviously, for most people, that's not something they can do themselves, depending on the size of the tree, and they might require assistance to do it. They are entitled to have a contract, and I think in the policy it gives some guidance as to how they can approach that. We will organise that work for them with administration fee if they require, and we do offer that as a service. We can't recommend tree contractors. However, we have recently been through a procurement process for contractors who meet our requirements for delivering trees in terms of best value and competencies and insurance and what have you. And we're happy to share that list with people because it's a publicly available, I suppose, information. So we can share with people what the contractors that we feel are able to do the work on our behalf, and they're obviously allowed to contact them or contact anybody else and do the work for them. We do ask anybody doing work on trees for us, or anybody doing work on trees that are owned by the county council, that they contact us first to agree the level of the work. And particularly with reference to the comments you made earlier, I do actually agree for pruning to be done beyond the boundary where it's prudent to do so for the health of the tree and the structural integrity of the tree at the resident's cost. If they do insist on pruning to the boundary, because pruning along a straight line arbitrarily is not necessarily a good thing for the tree. So we find a sensible compromise.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Guppy? Councillor Smith?
Should this be tree and hedges policy? I like the definition of the hedges. It's a line of trees or whatever. Yes, interesting, because hedges are a source of considerable concern with the trimming back, and I'd always assumed that it was possible for the council to say, if there's a safety issue, please trim your hedge. If you don't, we will do it, and we will seek reimbursement. But it doesn't look like that, does it? I would have welcomed a more concise policy. It's quite a long one, 5.5 pages, for somebody to understand a policy. But particular question was on the bottom of page 34, leading up. It's the request for tree safety assessments, and where a resident wishes to engage a private contractor to assess a tree, MCC will blah, blah, blah. The council must agree the cost of the survey in advance. And that struck me as funny because I thought, well, the resident's paying, so what are we doing? Saying the county council must agree the cost of the survey that the resident is actually paying themselves.
It may help if this is in relation to Monmouthshire County Council's trees, not private individuals' trees or a private hedge or anything like that. Yeah?
Yes, yeah. So this is it's purely in relation to trees owned by the county council. With regards to that final point, it was really there's an issue where we get people wanting to do surveys on our trees if they're not happy with our survey. So what we've said is, in fairness, if somebody wants to survey one of our trees because they're not happy with the survey that we have undertaken, and that survey says that we should do some work, and they want reimbursement for that survey, we should, before they carry out that survey, before we perhaps agree to reimbursing the cost of surveys to a member of the public, we should make sure that that survey is done at a reasonable cost and to a standard.
That's if we would be considering reimbursing them, but if they want to go it themselves, so be it, they just pick up the tab. Right. It would be nice if it was a little bit shorter to read.
Any other questions from members? Councillor Davis.
That's my first question. You answer that one first, and I'll come back.
Every single person who puts an inquiry into the county council regarding a tree or a hedge should have that report inspected. As I mentioned earlier, the number of requests for inspections has, increased, and part of the policy is to put a recognition of what we will and what we don't do. Those reports should be inspections will be made. The inspections will come up with a recommendation of work, and that work will be sent to the depots to be done. At least that is absolutely how it happens within Waste and Street Services. In highways, they also are very quick. My understanding is the same with countryside. I'm less familiar with estates, but I'm sure it's equally so. But generally speaking, we try and encourage everybody to come in through the My Council Services report of fault system. So I know in the past we do have some challenges in terms of directing the inquiry to the right department. So it may go to countryside because people think countryside look after trees. That may then come to me, which then goes to highways. So as I mentioned earlier about trying to improve process, about the back end of it, that's something we're going to be working on. But absolutely, we do regularly go out and clear back overhanging branches and hedgerows and that sort of things.
Okay. My other query is in relation to, you mentioned about the right to light, and you state that there is no common law right to light. Well, during my research, I found out the Right to Light Act 1959. And that states that if a property has received daylight for the last 20 years uninterrupted, they must be entitled to continue to receive that light. So in other words, if the authority has planted trees after 20 years and they are now obstructing the light, then the resident does have a right to go to court and query that. And this document, I think, is misleading because it's saying to people that you have no right to light, and that's not actually an accurate representation of the facts. It depends on the circumstances, and I got personal experience of this. But they have got a right to light. And even it doesn't have to be a tree; it could be a fence that the authorities put up if it's a high fence. So I think that's something within the document that really needs to be looked at, because it is slightly misleading for members of the public, I think. Thank you.
In response to that specific question, this is something that we've done quite a bit of investigation on ourselves. The statutory right to light is absolutely correct. There is a statutory right to light, but because it's in relation to a 20-year period of light, it has been contested with relation to trees, two particular cases. The challenge with the statutory right to light is this 20-year period. Now, the problem is with trees is that they grow. And because they grow, the change in light situation is over a period of time. So at what point is the right to light lost? And at what point or can there be a continuous period of 20 years? And this is what was contested in court. So the statutory right to light doesn't stand or hasn't stood up in court with regards to trees, and so is usually used in relation to fences or buildings. One of the reasons that the antisocial behaviour HASBOs, aren't they, antisocial behaviour orders, were introduced with relation to high hedges was because the right to light wasn't working, the statutory right to light law wasn't working for these hedges. So unfortunately, whilst there is a statutory right to light, perhaps it should say there isn't a statutory right to light in relation to tree canopies. So you're absolutely right on one hand, but in practice there isn't one in relation to trees.
So are you saying that 1959 statute no longer applies because there's precedent within law to say that it doesn't apply?
My understanding of the law is that the statutory right to light does exist, but it isn't applicable, or it has proven not possible to apply in relation to the tree canopy. But I'm happy to go back and speak to our legal department again about this, but that is my understanding.
Thank you for that answer. I don't want to push this too much. I think if you, as you suggested, perhaps alter the wording a little bit, it's very unlikely that many people are going to take up that anyway. But I am a bit concerned because I got personal experience of it, and I'm sure lots of other people have as well. So if perhaps the wording was altered slightly, that would satisfy me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dimmock?
Thank you, Chair. Just on what you said about people going to the right department, I know as a new member, I think my emails have done its round between you officers. I was wondering if maybe you could, maybe not a seminar, but some sort of training booklet or some training manual, of which then maybe we can use on social media, not only help for ourselves, but direct residents to go to the correct department. I think it just might be useful. It would be useful for me anyway.
Thank you. Roger, if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, I think the point well made, and it would benefit all members, I think. The other thing would probably be some names and numbers on occasions, and the extent, like we talked here, like we've talked about trees, they're council trees, these are, and yet highways will deal with private hedges and private trees against the highway. And it's those issues which perhaps we could provide you with some more information on, and yeah, I'll take that on board. And a general note to members, if that's okay. And yeah, in terms of social media, as members, you would perhaps not want to go through the full social media process to get to certain officers. So you may want a list of numbers which come direct to us. Whereas for general public consumption, we would tend to go through other protocols so as we got records of it, so they would come in through certain avenues rather than having a big wide list of names. So just bear that in mind when the information's put together.
When I spoke about social media, I mean more, for instance, like we said, Countryside deal with this particular issue or query, highways not giving your details and say, oh yeah, you can contact them direct via Facebook here and then put your profile. No, I didn't mean that.
I just, in terms of that particular comment, we're already sort of discussing within the department about some sort of accessible leaflets or literature, which we'd like to develop over the next year. Yeah, and we've also been having conversation with the housing associations as well about sort of trees, because although they're now transferred to the housing associations, to all intents and purposes, to the members of the public, they're public trees. So it is something that we want to develop. Is some more information about what trees are, the value of them, the way we manage them, and we can certainly, as you say, look at about helping people understand where to go to with regards to trees within the council.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members? Can I just ask a couple of questions of my own? I see under 5 you've got financial implications. I mean, you know, trees are very important to us, especially here in Monmouthshire, and the safety of trees and preserving them. And it seems to me that there's a lot of detailed work here. For example, just going around and identifying all the special trees is going to be quite a bit of work. And yet it says here the adoption of the tree policy has no financial implications in itself. So, you know, I'd have liked a little bit more detail, really, because I can't believe that all this work isn't going to impact upon your budget.
There are when we do tree inspections, the process should be and is that we currently do tree inspections. when we do tree inspections, we should be identifying, things like special trees. In terms of delivery of work, the actual tree cutting, tree pruning, that's something that we do anyway. The policy largely is about clarity of what we do, so people can understand what we do. As I said earlier, there are challenges just because of our, the current availability of resource to do that level of work, and some of it's going to, particularly around the identifying special trees. Once we've got a formula or a criteria for doing that, in principle, they'll get picked up over a period of years as we do any proactive tree assessments. It's not going to be something we're going out next year to do all in one go. It's something that will be a slow and long and rolling process. If we want to do it more quickly, then there will definitely be some implications on that. But I've been asked to look at this and create something which we can look at delivering within the context of how we are currently working. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a financial. It's going to be challenging to deliver.
Thank you. I mean, so there isn't going to be a time frame here about we're going to make sure that we look at all these trees and that we're going to have a plan to do it you're just going to do it alongside your existing workload. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And just one more point. Can you, because I've had as we all councillors, we all have to deal with issues on a weekly basis to do with trees. And I'm on page 38, it says that the County Council Highways Department will serve notices on landowners where hedges are deemed to affect the safety of the highway. And that applies to trees as well, presumably. How often do we actually monitor trees on roads? I mean, I've had a situation with some very enormous trees on the cut through from Gilwan to the Bailey Bridge, and that's being used as a real rat run. And I've had to, contact your department about these trees. So how often do we actually go round and check on, what trees are causing problems?
The highways trees are the responsibility of the highways team. I'm afraid I can't give you the exact answer. I do know that they've got staff that do it, but we can come back to you with the appropriate response that's correct.
Chairman, Councillor Easton asked earlier about a note about that, and perhaps I could pick it up at the same time. But we do have highways inspectors who go around carrying out exactly what it sounds like. They inspect the highway and all of the assets of that highway. The trees and issues like that should form part of that inspection. But there will be, I think it's best if I provide members with a further note about these issues, about how we respond to them, the level which we receive, and the matters which we have to deal with. Because what we're looking at here is the policy for Monmouthshire County Council's trees, and adopting a policy for that. These are trees, and very often those trees which you just mentioned then, I suspect are in private ownership. And we get into a different issue then about what is their impact upon the highway, and therefore what way we may demand of those landowners. So
they are private trees. That's absolutely right. I'd just like to know, how, having witnessed, sadly, somebody, I was actually in a village a road away when somebody was killed by a falling tree, a tourist. And although it's a one in, you give the figures there, when you have seen it happen, you do actually appreciate how important it is to have a really robust tree policy in place. Thank you. Are there any, Councillor Smith?
Just one little thing, please. I don't know where it comes into policy or whatever, but when people, whether it's us doing the highways or whatever, can we please require that the debris is shifted off the highways? somewhere in your policy a requirement that people make trimming their hedges, whatever works they're doing, they clear up satisfactorily?
I think if you're alluding to hedge trimming, and which may well be the case, I think it's outside of this policy. I would suggest that we pick that up separately, because it is an issue. I understand the issue which is being made. How we manage that is something else which I think members may want to give due consideration to.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much, officers, for your responses and for members' questions. And if there are no further comments, we've just been asked to comment on this policy, and I think that obviously we've raised some very valid points here this morning, which we look forward to those being included in the future document. So we'll now move on to agenda item 7, and that is to receive 2 petitions, one concerning the Church Road high risk traffic chaos Church Road Caldecott, and the second petition for road safety measures on the A40 Raglan bypass. So I would, Roger, if you can respond to the petitions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A petition received by the authority has to be reported at some point to members at a committee or cabinet or individual member, but at some point it has to be recognised through a council process. And as you'll be quite aware, we received numerous petitions. This is an opportunity which I've taken to report these 2 petitions to yourselves, and where the authority finds itself in relation to these 2 petitions. If I may, Madam Chairman, just to perhaps move this one out of the way, the petition for road safety measures on the A40 Raglan bypass was presented to the County Council, yet it is actually a trunk road. And what if the letter hasn't gone, then it is to go, is to write to the Welsh Government, advising them of the petition, of their concerns, and reinforcing that with the views also taken by the local county councillor and our cabinet member, I believe, sympathises with the position laid out. So to bring it to the responsible body, I will write to them. So with those statements, if it hasn't gone, it will do. I apologise, I'm not sure if we've done that one. But that has to go, and I think I agreed that with the local member. And that is what I will do. I don't know if you want to pick up any questions on that. I believe Councillor Jones.
Councillor Smith? Yeah. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, obviously I've walked across that road many a times myself, and it is very dangerous. The speed at which traffic goes down it is bad, and normally the state of the passing is in disrepair as well, although I've seen that it's improved recently. But you're often blindsided as you're crossing it, and awareness that there is a route there for cars as well. Obviously I know it's a trunk road, and it's something that came up in the Assembly when I was there too. But I would like this council to put a significant amount of pressure within that letter that you're going to write to them to highlight the safety concerns, because they, although I don't live in Raglan, they are a concern to me too, being someone that uses that road. I don't want to run over someone, thanks. And I'm concerned for the safety of the residents and children of Raglan as well. And I do agree with the local councillor there on how she's pushing this forward and making it a priority. I'd like, if possible as well, to put an urgency on you sending that letter, and also if I could request a copy of that letter goes out to the whole committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Did you want to comment further on that, Roger?
Yes, Madam Chairman, if members of the committee are minded to support the petition, then I'm quite happy to incorporate that within the letter along with the views of the Cabinet member and the local member.
Councillor Smith?
The content of the petition, does it actually include the junction, the turn off from the A449? Or is it purely a speed related issue? Because
I'll read the petition. And that is that proper signposts by the pedestrian crossings to Raglan Castle to make drivers aware of this crossing. So members familiar with the road is where you come into the bottom, really, opposite our road. A new roundabout where the old Monmouth Road and Grsonen Road reach the A40, since this junction is dangerous and currently unfit for purpose. It is unsuitable for use by HGVs and serious accidents happen there. Again, for members, that's the Monmouth Road junction across to what I call Frank Sutton's, but I think we all know where we're on about. That junction there. And finally, that a 50 mile per hour speed limit from the Raglan roundabout to the A40, A449.
Councillor Jones.
Could I ask for a seconder to move that?
And Councillor Davis, would you like to speak on the other petition?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have declared a personal interest in this because I am a resident of Church Road, and it was also me that initiated the petition in the first place and took the photographs and wrote the document as well. And I did that not because it personally affects me, because I'm a retired gentleman and I haven't got to go to work in the mornings, and I don't use the school, but I am very concerned about the safety of the residents and in particular the school children there. I mean, this problem, as the petition says, really has arisen since the new path was put into the school, and whereas drivers dropping their children off would go into Anthony Close, drop their children off and turn around, they now stop on Church Road. And there have been many, many instances, as the police will tell you as well, because they've had to attend, where Church Road has actually been in gridlock, where traffic cannot move either way. And we've had buses, cars and lorries mounting the pavement where there are pedestrians present, and school children at the end of the school day. And really something needs to be done about this. Now, I appreciate, and the residents appreciate, that there are financial difficulties, but there is no amount of money can be put on a child's life, in my opinion. So my motivation here is purely safety. I am a qualified health and safety professional as well as my other roles, and I would regard this as being a red line thing that needs to be evaluated and risk assessed. It's just not good enough to say that we haven't got the money and we can't do anything about it. We've got to provide the evidence to look at what's going on there and suggest things that can be put in place. Now, there's some suggestions in the petition, but obviously we are not the professionals. We like the professionals to come forward and tell us what they're going to do about this hazard, because it is inevitable. If you look at the photograph on that petition, there's actually a school child crossing in between traffic on her bike because she can't get across the road. And further down the road, there's cars mounting the pavement with people and children walking down. So it not only affects the health and safety of the children and the residents, we've also got vehicles who come up onto private drives because it's absolute gridlock and they're trying to, make some movement there. But it also affects traffic to the town centre, because this is the main road to Caldecott town centre. So everybody that lives on the estates the other side of Church Road is affected by gridlock, and so are the businesses. It's a major issue. I mean, one can't say that this happens every day, because it doesn't. But there are issues with regard to this on a regular basis, and it's something the council really needed to take seriously and look at, in my opinion. So what I would like is, first of all, for this petition to be moved forward, and I would like the council to respond to the residents who have signed this petition and tell them, they have evaluated it, these are their conclusions, and what, if anything, they intend doing about it. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Would you like to first of all respond?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In response to the concerns about the safety for pedestrians and school children in particular on Church Road has been raised previous to this petition, and we have investigated alternatives to try and reduce the level of traffic, particularly in relation to the pick up and drop off periods, to give some sort of separate arrangement whereby we could take at least some of that traffic away from this congested area. We did work up an earlier scheme to provide access through an estate to the rear of the school, and looked at costs around that. However, that hasn't been progressed to date, and there is another potential alternative, albeit through a unadopted road. Again, that was looked at the time. However, it hasn't been progressed since then. The police have been urged to attend more frequently to try and ensure that people behave, or motorists behave more responsibly in that area, albeit the points made by Councillor Davis are acknowledged that the pick up and drop off, it's not a problem peculiar to Church Road at all, but it is a particularly difficult situation on Church Road. So I can take that back to officers, and we could look again at whether or not there are alternatives. I'm not aware I'm not party to all conversations which have gone on. If it's a monetary issue, then it can be prioritised along with other schemes. And at some point I will be coming to members to discuss, not today, but how we do prioritise these types of schemes, and other schemes, particularly in relation to road safety, and how we prioritise those in the future and therefore get them done on a more programmed basis. So I will do that. We will look at it again. I undertake to ask officers to look at this again. I know the health and safety officer has similarly expressed concern, as has their head teacher. So it would likely be a joint effort to look at what may be pragmatic and what may be undertaken in that area to help improve the situation, which is acknowledged. I would be reluctant to write to every person who signed the petition, because whilst that one's fairly thin, the one, say, on the Raglan one is fairly thick. So as to get into this process where we write to each individuals, then I would be reluctant to do so, but would suggest that we write to the local member or place a note, or it'd be a minute of this committee which can be referred to for future reference, if that's of use.
Thank you, Roger. Would you like to come back, Councillor Davis?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think that's a good idea, Roger. What I'm asking for is that people know that this is being addressed. In relation to the number of signatures on that petition, if I'd have had the time, which I didn't, I could have got everybody from the estate the other side of Caldecott Castle as well, because everybody on that estate is affected by this issue. It took me a long time to get those signatures because everybody wants to talk to you when you're talking about an issue like this. But I can assure you I probably could have had 10 times as many signatures as you've actually got on that petition. It's that serious, I think. Thank you.
Just add, Mr. Chairman, the number of signatures, we don't measure the importance of the petition by the number of signatures. But practically, we will get from thousands down to maybe dozens. So, but we do not measure the importance on that basis. But we do, at some point in the future, need some form of prioritising these various demands which we find ourselves receiving.
Councillor Reason.
Can I just add, in relation to writing to the local member, that's good, I agree with that. And then obviously it will be up to the local member to communicate with the residents, okay, thank you.
Councillor Reason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I support the petition put before you, But the problem we got in that particular area, it goes back, it's a historical problem. There was an intention to have a mini bypass of Church Road some years ago, but it fell foul, as Mr. Hoggins just alluded to do with adoption of roads. There was a section of road along the back of the Church Road, which is going to be developed around to come back out past the Castle Pub in Caldecott. But because a section of road was never put up for adoption by the developer, and still to this day hasn't been put up for adoption by the developer, and of course we got flooding problems which we had to address. The section of road, which was section of the area upon which the section of road could have been built, has now been built with houses, which means to say that we're in an impossible situation of redeveloping that particular section of bypass around this particular section of road. It's not an insolvable problem, but it's a damn hard problem to solve.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. Did you want to make any further comment, Roger?
I think Councillor Easton has purely reinforced the position which we find ourselves in, but we will revisit it again and discuss it with the local member and the other parties which have already expressed an interest in it.
Okay, can we have a seconder for this? Councillor Davis, Councillor Eason, and can I just have a show of support for this petition? Thank you. Right, we'll thank you very much for your representations and for bringing those petitions. And moving on to item 8, we are now going to exclude the press and public from the meeting during the consideration of the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information.